Welcome to the Explainer. So, if you're a medical student, a graduate student, or honestly just anyone facing a totally monumental academic workload, you already know the drill. You know that intense pressure of having to memorize a continuously expanding mountain of information. The volume is staggering, the timelines are incredibly tight, and the stakes, well, they're sky high. But today, we're going to build a survival toolkit for your mind. We are looking at the absolute best, scientifically proven study strategies to help you master that academic rigor without sacrificing your mental health in the process.
Let me ask you a really honest question right up front. Are you working hard but still burning out? Because if you're spending hours poring over textbooks and notes but feeling like you're teetering right on the very edge of exhaustion, I want to validate exactly how you're feeling right now. That overwhelm is completely real. But here's the great news. If you're struggling to keep your head above water, the problem is absolutely not your effort. The problem is your strategy. Hard work alone just won't carry you through. It's time to totally rethink how we approach the material. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today to actively reduce your cognitive load. 1. The cognitive overload trap. 2. Spaced repetition and active recall. 3. Interleaving and the Pomodoro method. 4. Dual coding and the Feynman technique. And 5. Protecting your well-being. Starting with Section 1, the cognitive overload trap. Now, you might be wondering how our brains physically process immense amounts of new information. Well, cognitive load theory proves that our working memory has a very finite capacity. When we're subjected to high levels of stress, picture a medical resident feeling totally overwhelmed by a surplus of new patient info in the ICU, our ability to process information just gets overwhelmed. When this cognitive load exceeds our working memory capacity, our learning and our performance actively degrade. You literally can't cram more in. The system just crashes. And this brings us to a major culprit of that cognitive overload and burnout: passive learning. Rereading your notes, highlighting textbooks until the whole page is neon yellow, and cramming the night before. Sure, they feel incredibly productive in the moment, but they're actually among the least effective ways to encode information. Passive learning gives you this false illusion of competence. Active recall, on the other hand, forces you to actually retrieve the information from your brain without looking at your notes. It involves flashcards, practice problems, or sketching out everything you know completely from memory. It's much harder, for sure, but it actually works. Which brings us to Section 2, spaced repetition and active recall.
And this brilliantly illustrates a concept known in the literature as desirable difficulties. To make active recall work, we have to embrace the struggle. Research shows that tasks requiring considerable effort might initially slow down your learning, but they drastically improve your long-term performance. Think of it like going to the gym. Benching a 10-pound weight is like passively rereading a lecture. It feels super easy, but you aren't really growing. Benching a 100-pound weight? That's like closing your book and writing out drug mechanisms strictly from memory. That friction, that sheer discomfort of not immediately knowing the answer, is the exact signal that true learning is actually happening. To make those difficult memories stick, we look to the psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus and his famous forgetting curve. Ebbinghaus demonstrated that after forming a memory, we naturally just gradually forget it over time. But if we repeatedly expose ourselves to that same piece of information at increasing intervals right before we're about to forget it, the memory becomes incredibly durable. This is exactly why cramming is terrible. Studying for 8 hours spread over 2 weeks will yield vastly superior long-term performance than cramming for 8 hours in a single exhausting sitting.
So, how do modern students practically apply this science? Because you simply can't manually track when to review thousands of individual facts. That's exactly why over 70% of students adopt apps like Anki early on in their academic careers. Anki is an open-source, spaced repetition platform that automates the whole shebang. It tests you on bite-sized facts using active recall, and its algorithm schedules the flashcards based precisely on how difficult it was for you to remember them. It is a real game-changer. Moving on to Section 3. Interleaving and the Pomodoro method. Let's shift gears to talk about study stamina. How do you actually study for hours without your brain completely melting? The answer lies in interleaving. Instead of blocking off 4 hours to study just one single subject, like, say, only focusing on physics, interleaving means actively switching between different topics or ideas during your study session. Counterintuitively, this is incredibly beneficial because it wards off burnout and boredom by providing your brain with novel stimuli. Even better, it forces your brain to identify links, similarities, and differences across different principles.
So, the crucial point here is that interleaving requires careful calibration. Actually, if you switch topics every 5 minutes, you just fall into the trap of multitasking, and your effectiveness will tank. The best evidence-based method is to combine interleaving with the Pomodoro technique. Complete 1 or 2 focused Pomodoro blocks, say 25 to 50 minutes of intense study, and then switch to a completely new topic. At the end of your entire session, summarize the key points you've learned, but force yourself to do it in a totally different order than how you studied them.
All right, Section 4, dual coding and the Feynman technique.
Get this. Surveys show a staggering number. 93% of average Americans and 93% of primary and secondary teachers in the UK strongly believe in learning styles. This is the idea that you're specifically a visual learner or a kinesthetic learner, and you need material tailored to your specific style. But here's the fascinating truth. Scientific research has repeatedly tested this theory and proven that learning styles are a complete myth. No way, right? Matching instruction to a preferred style does not actually improve learning at all.
In fact, relying on the learning styles myth can foster a dangerous fixed mindset where a student says, "Oh, I can't do math because I'm only a visual learner." The evidence-based alternative here is dual coding. Dual coding is the science of combining meaningful words and visual representations like diagrams or graphic organizers to boost understanding for everyone. It provides your brain with 2 different powerful scientific pathways to understand and retrieve the exact same complex idea. Another incredible strategy for deep comprehension is the Feynman technique, named after the famous physicist Richard Feynman. This is an elaboration strategy, really focused on learning by teaching. First, you generate questions about how a concept works. Second, you attempt to explain the material out loud, entirely in your own words, as if teaching it to someone else. Finally, you cross-reference your explanation with your notes to verify accuracy. It absolutely forces you to immediately identify any embarrassing gaps in your own knowledge way before test day arrives.
And finally, Section 5, protecting your well-being. We have to acknowledge that academic rigor takes a heavy toll. Studies are showing burnout rates soaring between 22% and 52% in intense medical residencies alone. To safeguard your mind, you have to shift your perspective. Focus on the messy process of learning and change rather than exclusively obsessing over grades and rankings. Normalize the stress and the difficulty. It is okay to struggle. More importantly, relying on proven tools like Anki and spaced repetition isn't just about getting better in service examination scores. The literature actually shows that students who adopt these blended learning strategies report significantly decreased test-related anxiety and are statistically proven to mitigate that intense burnout. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Will you keep studying harder, or are you ready to start studying smarter? We've seen today that simply putting in more hours of passive reading is just a recipe for cognitive overload and complete exhaustion. I challenge you to swap your comfortable, passive habits for the friction of desirable difficulties. Try a Pomodoro block of active recall today. Download a spaced repetition app. Your time, your mind, and your future career are incredibly valuable. It is time to protect them. Thank you so much for joining me, and happy studying.